Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuttapadakammalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitangscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sude Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I'm very happy to be here with you this evening in the very special place of Shri Radha Nila Madhava. As probably most of you know, Nila Madhava is the form of Lord Krishna who appeared before Lord Jagannath in Orissa. Actually, there are, I believe, more than one Nila Madhava deities in Orissa. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Thank you. Now I feel so much better. These carnations actually have some fragrance. Oops. Oh well. It was nice as long as it lasts. Okay, I'll wear it like in South India. South Indian deities. So, especially nice, I think, that all of you have come to the temple, because I believe today is a day in Seattle where most people have gone to another temple, namely the football stadium, where they are worshipping an odd-shaped ball. And they're performing a yajna, a sort of competitive yajna, in which there's lots of violence of a certain sort. So, very nice that you have come to have darshan of Radha Madhava, to be together with devotees, to hear and chant Hare Krishna mantra, to hear Bhagavad Gita. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I think we can do better than that. Let's try that again with a little more spirit, shall we? Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
That was much better. Shall we try it again? It feels good, doesn't it? Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And once more to make an even 6. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Very good, very good. All right. Well, I would like to begin with a verse which is almost at the end of chapter 2. And it's a verse which some of you may be familiar with. How many of you have read the entire Bhagavad Gita? Good, some of you. How many of you have not, would like to read the entire Bhagavad Gita? Others of you are not so sure yet. That's all right. The Bhagavad Gita, for those of you who are less familiar, is a very important book in our tradition. It is a wonderful dialogue. It's actually an education that's taking place between Arjuna and Krishna. Arjuna is the student, Krishna is the teacher. The situation in which the teaching is going on, the classroom, is a very unusual one. It's a battlefield. And the circumstances are very difficult circumstances. It's just before a great battle between two sides of the same family. It's really a very unfortunate situation in which Arjuna finds himself, a very awkward situation. As one of the heroes of the Pandavas, he feels himself duty-bound to fight a dharmic battle against persons who are attempting to usurp not only a kingdom, but the essential principles of human life, of dharmic life. And you're all familiar with this word dharma, no doubt. It's a word which is used quite a bit in Bhagavad Gita. In fact, in the whole Mahabharata, of which the Bhagavad Gita is a small portion. Some will say that the basic question of the Mahabharata is, what is Dharma? And some will say that the Mahabharata asks the question but doesn't really give a clear answer. There is a clear answer in the Bhagavad Gita, but the answer is rather shocking. The answer is coming almost at the end of Bhagavad Gita when Krishna tells Arjuna, give up all dharma. What? What do you mean, give up all dharma? Yes, give up all dharma and just take shelter of me. Sarva dharman parityaja mam ekam sharanam raja. Why should I do that? Aham tvang sarvabhapebhyo mokshayishyami. Because if you do this, you will become free from all of that which is making you suffer. You will become liberated. Mokshayishyami. I will liberate you, he says. And then he makes a reassuring statement at the end. Ma shucha, do not fear. There's so much to fear. Practically speaking, there's everything to fear in this life. This is a life of uncertainty. And the more that the world tries to promise us some kind of certainty, the more uncertain we get. What is going to be the next day? What is going to be the next week and month and year? And where will I be 10 years from now? Will I be anywhere in this world 10 years from now? It is a life of uncertainty. It is a life of in which we are governed to a large extent, consciously or unconsciously, by fear. So Krishna's promise at the end of his discussion, his education, is Ma Sucha, do not fear. Okay, so that's a little of the context. Now I want to back up to this, what I find is a very wonderful analogy Krishna's giving in verse number 70 of chapter 2. In the Sanskrit it goes like this. It's a trishtup verse. Most of the verses are anushtup. Anushtup means having 8 syllables per line. The trishtup has, how many? 11, I believe. āpūryamāṇam acala-pratiṣṭhaṁ samudram praviśanti yadvat tadvat kāma praviśanti sarve śāntim āpnoti kāma-kāmī. The word kāma is coming up a few times in this verse. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. A person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. I'll read that again just so we make sure we got it. A person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man, not the person who strives to satisfy such desires. All right, here's Srila Prabhupada's purport. Although the vast ocean is always filled with water, it is always, especially during the rainy season, being filled with much more water. But the ocean remains the same. Steady. It is not agitated, nor does it cross beyond the limit of its brink. That is also true of a person fixed in Krishna consciousness. As long as one has the material body, the demands of the body for sense gratification will come. The devotee, however, is not disturbed by such desires because of his fullness. A Krishna-conscious man, or I would add woman, is not in need of anything because the Lord fulfills all his material necessities. Therefore, he is like the ocean, always full in himself. Desires may come to him like the waters of the rivers that flow into the ocean, but he is steady in his activities. And he is not even slightly disturbed by desires for sense gratification. That is the proof of a Krishna-conscious man, one who has lost all inclination for material sense gratification, although the desires are present. Because he remains satisfied in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, he can remain steady, like the ocean, and therefore enjoy full peace. Others, however, who want to fulfill desires even up to the limit of liberation, what to speak of material success, never attain peace. The fruit of workers, the salvationists, and also the yogis who are after mystic powers are all unhappy because of unfulfilled desires. But the person in Krishna consciousness is happy in the service of the Lord, and he has no desires to be fulfilled. In fact, he does not even desire liberation from the so-called material bondage. The devotees of Krishna have no material desires, and therefore they are in perfect peace. Again, the verse, āpūryamāṇam acala-pratiṣṭhaṁ samudram praviśanti yadvat tadvat kāma praviśanti sarve śāntim āpnoti kāma-kāmī. A person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled, but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. There are many analogies in Bhagavad Gita. This is one of my favorites. Analogies are used in philosophy, especially in Indian philosophy, to help us understand abstract ideas. We use an analogy as a kind of bridge. In Indian tradition, there is the expression Shaka Chandra Nyaya. Shaka means branch, as in branches of a tree. And Chandra means the moon. And Nyaya, in this case, means analogy. It can mean logic, but here it means something more like analogy. Shaka Chandra Nyaya, the idea is small child, you want to call attention for the child to see the moon, but the child has trouble focusing. And so you take the aid of the sort of V between two branches of a tree. And you say, you see these branches of the tree, you line up so that the moon is in between. And so then the child says, oh, there's the moon. So that's an analogy about analogies. Yes, and it gives us the understanding of how all analogies work. In this case, we have an analogy where the immediate element is two things. There's river and there's ocean. Anyone who has not experienced rivers flowing into oceans? No. Well, maybe someone who lives in desert. Someone who lives in Rajasthan has not seen this. But most of us here in Seattle, it's not a problem. So ocean is there, rivers are flowing into oceans. Do the rivers disturb the ocean by flowing into them? No. So that is the crux of what Krishna is saying here, where he's saying that our experience of desire, so this is now going to what is abstract, something which we cannot grasp by seeing. Desires, we all have experience of desire. We have so many demands of the body. We become very conscious of this if we do any fasting on fasting days, isn't it? Have you fasted for Janmashtami sometime? Yeah, so all day long you're thinking, I should be thinking of Krishna, but I'm thinking of my stomach instead. So just one day of fasting, one day of not feeding the body can bring so much awareness of how much we are impelled to meet demands of the body. And of course, this is a very concrete example, but there are others, so many sorts of desire that we have. We project ourselves very much into the future. We see ourselves, I want to be this, I want to do that, I want to make this or the other arrangement, isn't it? We make so many plans. All of this is our desires. We sometimes we tell others, and sometimes we don't, but we have so many desires. There was a British philosopher, John Stuart Mill, back in the 19th century, I believe, maybe 18th. He was mainly known as an economist, but he one day woke up in the morning and he thought, what if all my desires would be fulfilled? He asked himself that question. He realized he would still not be satisfied. There would simply be other desires, other demands, other wants. In English, we have the word want as a kind of double meaning. To want something is to say, you know, I'm going to go get this. But also, to want something is to be lacking that thing. This verse begins with the word āpūryamāṇam, acala-pratiṣṭhaṁ. The ocean is full. It's always full. Similarly, a person who has become advanced in spiritual life is like the ocean, is always feeling full, complete. Actually, this is our problem, is we experience ourselves as being incomplete. The invocation to Ishopanishad, you know, some of you know it. How does it go? Om Purnam Adaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udacchate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Avashishyate. So many times in this one little verse the word Purnam comes. What does Purnam mean? Complete. Yes. Everything is complete, and if you take everything away from the complete whole, it's still complete. That's a definition of the Supreme. And, very interesting point Srila Prabhupada makes in his purport to this verse. I recommend reading his purports. There's a lot there. So in his purport, he explains that all kinds of feeling of incompleteness is due to incomplete knowledge of the complete whole. So we feel ourselves to be incomplete. Why do we feel ourselves to be incomplete? Because we do not recognize that we are part and parcel of the complete whole. Anyway, in this verse, the example of the ocean as being complete, and therefore what? And therefore undisturbed. Undisturbed. Even though so many rivers are flowing in. How many rivers? There's so many rivers all over the world. In India, of course, the Ganga is the prominent river, which is dashing down the Himalayas and flowing thousands of miles and eventually going to Ganga Sagara and entering into the ocean. And of course there's a cycle right? The water will again be lifted, it will again be taken over the Himalaya, it will again drop, and it will come down. Of course, now things there, this is a footnote, are getting disturbed. The glacier, which is the source of the Ganga, is receding. Why is it receding? Global warming. And what is global warming? It's because here we are in Seattle and everywhere else in the world, and we think we have to have so many different expenditures of energy in order to be happy. This is our disease. We are burning up the planet as if there's no tomorrow. So the Ganga is coming down. We hope it will continue to come down. The Yamuna, oh, don't get me started about the Yamuna. The Yamuna comes down the Himalaya, and then what happens? It all gets siphoned off before Delhi. And what remains manages to trickle through Delhi, and it comes out. The only thing that comes out is garbage. It's a dead river. It's technically a dead river when it leaves Delhi. Anyway, we don't want to get depressed today, after all. Today is football day. I don't know who's winning or losing. Anyway, who cares? Somebody will win, somebody will lose. That is the problem of this world. We're in a world of winners and losers. We want to go to that place where everyone wins, because everyone is engaged in service to the supreme winner. Yes. Okay, I'm getting a little off the topic. I wanted to actually back up a little from this verse to verse number 54, because starting with verse 54 and going to the end of the Bhagavad Gita, well, starting with 55. 54 is Arjuna's question, and then the remainder of this chapter is Krishna's answer. And I thought to look at this section for a particular reason related to the time, the occasion. I have to admit, as I understand, it's not today, it's tomorrow that there is observance of Martin Luther King Jr.'s, is it his birthday or his day of departure, Tirubhava, I don't know. Birthday, okay. Yeah, so this has become a national holiday because this is a very honored person for how he struggled in this country to bring about recognition of equal rights for people of all different backgrounds. And he is especially famous for his declaration, "I have a dream." And then he went on to give a very stirring speech, one of the most famous speeches in modern world history, I would say. About the dream of people living and respecting each other, not oppressing each other, not hurting each other, and so on. Well, I bring him up because he was inspired, in particular, in much of what he did by Mahatma Gandhi, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. And as you all know, Gandhi was very instrumental in the political affairs of India, the release of India from British rule. We have this joke now about the British Empire. You know, they used to say that the sun never sets on the British Empire, but of course now it's the opposite. The sun never rises on the British Empire because the sun never rises in England, and England is the only place left in the British Empire. Anyway, he was extremely important in this development, and his process, his way of going about this was his nonviolent cooperation. His principle of ahimsa and satyagraha were the two key elements of his modus operandi. All right, now take a step further back and ask the question, so what inspired Mahatma Gandhi? Well, turns out Bhagavad Gita inspired him. But what specifically in Bhagavad Gita inspired him? It turns out he explained that it was these verses starting with Arjuna's question in chapter 2, that's verse 54. When you get home or in the course of this next week, you can read. I won't read all these verses, but the question of Arjuna is interesting. He says, "O Krishna, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? How does he speak, and what is his language? How does he sit, and how does he walk?" Krishna's answer to this question constitutes the remainder of chapter 2. Well, you can say, in effect, the remainder of Bhagavad Gita, directly or indirectly, but specifically these next, 20, almost 20 verses are his answer. So that's what inspired Gandhi. Why? Because Gandhi had this very strong conviction, which I think is relevant for us. Although we may not be followers of Gandhi, we are followers of the Vaishnava Acharyas, of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and the disciplic succession, Srila Prabhupada. But he had one interesting idea. He said, be the change that you want to see in the world. So all of us would like to see change in the world. And most people, because of that conviction to make some change for the better in the world, will go about making change in the world, but they will do so without any great success, or whatever success they have will be temporary. Why? Because they don't understand this point. You have to be the change yourself in order to affect change in the world. And what kind of change? That is what Krishna is speaking about here in these chapters, in these verses. So, for example, he says in the next verse, this is verse 55, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "O Partha, when a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification which arise from mental concoction, and when his mind thus purified finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness." Now, when we hear this, well, if you're like me, you may groan, thinking, well, I'm not going to be able to do that. And it's interesting because here, although it says giving up all desires, at the end of this chapter, Krishna is saying, desires, you cannot give up these desires. They're like rivers. Can you stop the rivers? No. So what do? Stop identifying with the desires. Identify with the self. Identify with the Supreme Self. Identify with our actual identity. And what is that? We are servants. Servants of who? Servant of the ocean, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is full in himself. If we make that little shift, then so much wonderful change can happen in our life, and we attain actual peace. The last few days I've been reading, I'm sure some of you have also read this wonderful book, The Journey Home. His Holiness Radhanath Swami's autobiography. Well, it's an autobiography of about a year and a half in his life. He's telling the story of how he came to Krishna consciousness. It's an extremely gripping story, and I recommend, if you haven't read it, that you read, because in this book you will learn so much. Radhanath Swami met so many amazing persons, so many different types of yogis, so many mystics, magicians. His life was put in danger several times, and simply by his prayer to the Lord, he felt himself being saved, protected. Eventually, coming all the way from America, going to Europe, and overland, if you can imagine such a thing, to India, hitchhiking with absolutely no money, getting finally to the Indian border with a visa in hand, but the border guard asking him, how much money do you have? He had no money. You cannot enter. You must have $200. Being rejected. He pleaded, no, you cannot come in. But I'm coming to, this is where I'm searching for God. No, he waited for a shift change. And the next gentleman agreed to let him in. Anyway, I wanted to mention one person that he met. He finally makes it to Vrindavan. I'm telling the whole story in 2 minutes. And in Vrindavan, he also meets many wonderful persons, many devotees. And one of the devotees that he meets is a sadhu named Ganesham. And Ganesham lives in the hallway of a householder, and at night he sleeps on the floor. And what does he do with his time? He worships deities, Radha and Krishna, which he has been given charge of, who are in a little tiny alcove in this temple, in this house. And when he meets Radhanath Swami, he feels that Radhanath Swami is an associate of Radha and Krishna. And so he, this elderly gentleman, does everything for Radhanath Swami and nothing for himself, including feeding him and eating nothing himself. This spirit of selflessness, it is not desirelessness. He had an incredibly strong desire to serve the devotee of Krishna. It was so strong that even though Radhanath Swami begged, no, don't do this, he was trying to help him. The old man could barely walk. He was taking water every day for his deity. He could barely move. But when Radhanath Swami said, I'll take it for you, I can take it, tears came to his eyes. No, he said, this is my service. Don't take my service away from me. He was desperately holding on to his service. So it's not that one is giving up desire, but one is giving up the misconception of who one is. So this is the whole Bhagavad Gita. It is showing us how to shift, how to get real, as we say in America. How to get real. This is an institution for learning how to get real. So we need to always pursue this path. It is on the one side a very broad path and on the other very narrow. Krishna says, he says, everyone is on my path in all respects. Yes, and everyone is spinning around going in different directions. We need to get going in the right direction on the path. So the Bhagavad Gita is there to help us. The devotees are there to help us. Shishi, Radha, Nila Madhava are most especially there to help us. So I encourage you, keep going. Keep going on the path. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki, Ananta Goti Vaishnavarinda ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Nitai Gaura Premanande. Hare Krishna. Thank you all very much for your attention.